capstone client was CFCR, the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation. They are an educational mediary group that works with industry and the federal regulation in moving the needle on the shift in federal regulation for cannabis. They are an organization filled with incredible, diverse experts, from public policy experts to science and regulatory professionals who have worked in agencies, to DEI specialists who are working diligently to keep social equity and social justice information in these regulatory conversations and bring those stakeholders to the table. It is an honor to present my work with them to you. So when I went to choose what was I going to do for this capstone project, I looked at my skill set and the ultimate idea of impact, and I said, well, we're not doing a whole lot until the federal government gets on board. So I beelined it to CFCR. In our work together, we decided on an instrument that would most benefit their platform. We decided on a white paper, which is how they generally communicate with their industry and with the experts. This paper is about 50 pages, and it's chock full of interesting information, but I'm going to present to you the part that I think was most interesting in my experience in doing the work with them, and that is the conversations. So the presentation that I'm going to bring to you is the conversations I had with these advisors. Our objectives, there were two terminal objectives, and they centered around initiating and engaging comprehensive conversations in relationship to the FDA. So we specifically focused everything on FDA because, as James said, there's a lot of uncertainty about the role of FDA as an executive agency and what they can and can't do as far as rulemaking and what needs to happen and from whom. So let's clear that up. FDA gets kind of a bad rap. I'm a yoga teacher for 2 decades, very background in natural health. I have barely taken antibiotics in my life. So when I am approaching FDA, I just want to tell you that they are a tremendous organization. We'll get into that, and we get a lot of they get a lot of slack, and some of it is very due. And I also want to say that anytime you go into a pharmacy or over the counter and you are using a food, a drug, or cosmetic, and you are successful in using it, thank the FDA, okay? It is quite a regulatory agency, and we take a lot of our safety things for granted. So I'm gonna move on. So in talking with the expert advisors that CFCR gave me access to, we split it up into two specific categories, and one was the industry experts and the other were the regulatory experts. And I'm going to bring to you the industry expert conversations first. So here is Dr. Jordan TISHLER. Dr. Jordan TISHLER is a Harvard MD. He is a cannabinoid specialist, and he is based in Boston. And this is maybe the second time that I've had an opportunity to talk with him. And when I talked to Dr. TISHLER and I asked him specifically, like, what do you think about federal regulation? What is it that you're interested in? And he replied to me that the first thing is he would like a prescriptive process. He said, I'm a doctor. When my patients come in to me, I want to be able to give them a prescriptive process that for whatever symptom or whatever issue that they're having, I want to be able to give them a particular medicine in cannabis at a dose and at a frequency that applies, that I can follow up with them and has a standardization so that when they go and refill, that they get the same thing or similar to it enough that it works for them. And that is not happening in any of our states. We just don't have that kind of, especially standardization and the ability, I kind of make a joke, it's like women in cosmetics. You fall in love with a lip liner and you never find it again. But but you know, and that is some of the things that as doctors and clinicians is what he wants. And then he said, you know, Karen, I don't want to see more research. He said, I want to see more robust research. And that is a problem because most of the research, as you all have noticed as you work through our master's program and we're identifying research and whether it is a robust study, you know, it depends on so many aspects. And when you have regulations so tight that very few people are either doing the research or the research that you're doing isn't matching the type of products that are available to people, it became an issue. So that was a big issue. And in that issue, we talked about research a lot. And one of my favorite parts of this project was going in deep into the research. So what's up with the research here in the United States? So real quick in this slide, as of around now, or February of 2023, when I finally finished this paper, there were about 55,000 published papers on cannabinoids. Okay, I used search fields of cannabinoids, cannabis, marijuana dated from 1945 to 2023. So 55,000 published papers. From 2022 to 2023 alone, there were almost 2,000 current published papers. So we are in a pretty dynamic time of research in this country. And it's only going to get more broad and wonderful because, and a part of this paper that I really loved, and if you're interested, you'll have a QR code that you can check it out, but I went really deep into identifying the new bulk manufacturing licenses that have been awarded over the past, 2022, 2020, 2021, for the past 2 years. So now there are 7 DEA Schedule I bulk licenses. 6 more have been added since Dr. El Soli's license, which we studied in 608. If you took 608, we went through a slide pack there, and now we have 6 others. Now, of those research companies, they have niche-oriented. And many of those, at least 3 of those, are primarily focused on veterans research for PTSD and first responders. And that's big. That is a big deal. There is one process you probably have heard, Sue Sicily, she is in phase 2 of PTSD study with veterans and with inhalation as a route of administration. And interesting enough that I thought as I was digging through this, so here's Sue Sicily with a DEA Schedule I license, and I'll tell you another really cool part of her research is Michigan's adult use has given her a very large amount of money from their taxes to do this research. So where is the funding coming for research? Well, it's coming from these types of things. So when she got this wonderful amount of money to do the research with the veterans, Bank of America shut down her bank account because she's doing cannabis research. But she's doing it with a federal license. So we're getting in our own way. So I digress a little bit, but. So in this research, we'll continue to do this research, and I would encourage you to check out, who is doing the research, how to search it on NIH's Reporter. You can look up the publications, you can look up how much money, you can look up who is the principal investigator, how long it's going on, what stage is it in, if it's been published, and those types of things. There's an incredible amount of information that's available to you. My second advisor was Scott Riefler. Scott Riefler is the Chief Scientific Officer of Source Technologies, and they're based out of Seattle. Source Technologies is a company that is working in infusion of food and beverage products. Some of their products are CBD-infused beverages, and they have created a technology of emulsification that takes lipids into water solubles that the industry is really banking on, and they're doing well with it. So I said to Scott, Scott, what's important to you? And Scott says, oh my gosh, where do I start? So Scott comes from an industry of aerospace and air industry technology, which is an incredibly highly regulated industry. And he says, I can't get over it. He's like, there are good manufacturing practices that are industry standards. We have generally regarded as safe principles, and no one is adhering to them. Well, not no one, but there are those who aren't, and those unscrupulous participants are creating a real dilemma for us in this industry. So Scott says, we need to take into consideration his biggest, his priority was, before we prioritize access, we really need to prioritize safety, standardization, and compliance. And in those, Scott brought to my attention, and to all of us who read this paper, that these are just some of the industry professional associations in relationship to cannabis and hemp products that oversee industry standards and protections. You can see that the American Herbal Products Association is located here, and in that AFA, they have created something called the Hemp Lexicon. And what is really important as we move forward in this industry is creating a vocabulary and a way in which that we uniformly discuss and define the terms of our industry. And that really is important so that we all can speak the same language and that we can move forward with that language into the tasks that we need to do in those safety compliances and standardizations. Food Chemicals Codex, they have been around for, I think, 1930s or something. It is outrageous how many incredible organizations that get together with scientists and regulators and people in industry who create standards that we as an industry must adhere to. And we must continue to hold accountable those in our industry. Otherwise, we are all going to suffer from poor players in this. My next conversation was with Mara Gordon. I don't know if you've heard of Mara Gordon, and maybe you've seen her TED Talks on the myths of cannabis. About 500 million people, about 500,000, 500,000 people have. She was the feature of Weed the People documentary that was on Netflix for quite a while. You could probably still YouTube it. And by profession, Mara is a process engineer. And in her own exploration of cannabis with her husband and herself, she began to formulate products many, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, that she then, for about a decade, went into helping formulate cannabis medicine for pediatric cancer patients. So Mara has quite a lot of experience in the industry. In fact, in 2012, she went to the FDA and she said, hey, we need to talk about this because cannabis doesn't quite fit into your mold. Because the FDA focuses on single molecule or single compound substances that direct pointed enzymes and receptors. But when you have a complex a chemovar or a process like cannabis brings to medicine in full spectrums, and when you're using the combination of compounds to in therapeutics, then the FDA medicine route doesn't really work that way. So she brought that to the FDA. I asked Mara what else she thought was important, and she said that there is a lot of misrepresentation of ingredients and potencies, and we need to solve that. She also believed that profit-driven organizations do not have the protected integrity that institutions and government agencies in testing will. She believed that the trends in adult use affect the medical programs, and we see that. So in the state of our country right now, 38 states have medical programs, and 22 now have adult use programs. And we're not going to talk about Maryland yet because that's yet to reveal, which I believe they're doing a great job. And they're going to reveal that in July. But most states, when they went adult use or regulated 21, have really seen an incredible demise of their medical programs. And that's a problem. That becomes a real issue. And there is a difference. If you're not sure what that is, if that's not in your state, head into DC before you head out of here and go into a Recreation 21 dispensary and go take a look at the products in there. You're going to see things that look like kids' candy packaging. There's not going to be any COAs on that. You'll have to use a QR code, and they're not even going to be able to tell you what cultivar that the joint you just bought was from. And they'll say, oh, everything is at 22%. So as we move towards FDA discussion, the current FDA-approved cannabis drugs are as follows. So we have Marinol, which has been moved to Schedule 3. We have Sesmet, which is in Schedule 2. Syndros, which is also a dronabinol, which is in Schedule 2. And then we have Epidiolex that we know it was a Schedule 5, and now it's no longer scheduled. Clearly, cannabis has medical benefit. The most recent FDA and legislative responses to the industry, as we're talking about conversations, which I think we have to keep talking in conversations about. So in October 2021, the FDA identified an emerging safety and vulnerability with the hemp-derived cannabinoids and needed to create partnership for scientific research to evaluate their safety and consumer vulnerabilities. So that was October 2021. Hemp bill was 2018, so about 3 years later. And that adverse response, there is a site, a part of the FDA site that is for adverse effects on any drug or food or cosmetic, and that exists. And a lot of us just don't know that that's there. Another legislative response, which was a big yay, was the Medical Marijuana and Cannabinoid Research and Expansion Act on December 2nd of 2022. Interesting, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but 2 years prior on the same exact day, the Single Convention of Narcotic Drugs, that international convention, moved cannabis from their Schedule 4, which is their most restrictive, to their Schedule 1. So this was 2 years after that the international convention moved cannabis into a recognized medical place. We then allowed for more research in order to allow us to do that. I do want to say something that I did learn, one of the lessons I learned, and I understood it as we learned it in our classes, but really it really drove home for me was the level in which that scheduling on that international level, it goes from 4 to no medical use, highest risk ever, which is where cannabis was on the international scale and where we see it in the US on 1. Them moving into 1 did not sequentially go 4, 3, 2, 1. It doesn't work like that on the international. They went from 4, most risk, to 1, which is second most risk. 2 would be less on theirs, 3 would be even less. So it's a little bit confusing, isn't it? It's nonsensical for sure, but that's how it works. So, but we're still in 1, and we do go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it is diminishing, but we're still in 1. And finally, the FDA concludes that the existing regulatory framework for foods and supplements are not appropriate for cannabidiol, and we will work with Congress on a new way forward. So that was January 26th of this year. A lot of people were kind of bummed, like they felt that FDA sort of punted on doing something about it, but you have to understand that FDA is an executive agency that works in its ability to enforce things through a process called rulemaking. And unless they are given the administrative permission to make rules, they can't do it. So their hands are really tied here. So taking it to Congress is the only way that they can do it, so that Congress can say, hey, we have an issue here. Congress at this point, and I've consulted with some attorneys who say that this is really the only way, they're the only way we can move out of Schedule 1. I wondered if there was an executive, Biden made the executive, the presidential pardon in October of last year, and I thought, well, why doesn't, maybe he could just make an executive order and pull it out of the schedule, but that's not how it works. So Congress must make this change. Now, Congress will make this change in the Farm Bill. Like, the 2018 Farm Bill is going to be a bit abrupt to some, but I promise you that those changes are going to create a more viable and industry that has integrity. So let's move to the agency and the experts from the agency. This is JOANNE CHIEDI. JOANNE CHIEDI was the former Inspector General of HHS, which is Health and Human Services. JOANNE was the Inspector General for about $3 trillion worth of programs on a federal level. She was a public policy advisor, and she has shared the information that what most people don't know is the FDA, as huge as the organization is, she says it's very siloed. Each department has their own specialty, and in those specialties, they often do not cross or overlap in their work. But because cannabis overlaps so many of their divisions and departments, it is tough to navigate in the agency in the way that the agency is formed. She wants us to understand that, and believes that if we understand more about the jurisdictions within the FDA and the way in which the FDA moves through their regulatory process, we as an industry would understand how to approach them better. In my paper, I spent a few pages going through the organizational charts of FDA. FDA sits in the House of the House of Health and Human Services, and there are so many departments and agencies within that housing. FDA itself has its own departments, including CEDAR, which is a big one that is doing a lot of research for cannabis. So JOANNE shares with us, and she's very subtle, but she says a lot. She says that patient stories and simple narratives when speaking to regulators and legislators are really powerful. Don't give them too much at one time and make it personal. Federal regulators, they want the states to thrive. So they are looking for robust industry. And in transitions, it's really important for them to know that business can maintain a certain level of standard when they're making transitions. Keeping key players and people who can sustain an industry change was really important. Ask opposing views. Those legislators that are in your districts or in your states that are federal regulators or state regulators that don't agree, they're people that you should go to. Go to them and ask them, what do you need to make this a better space for you? Because cannabis isn't going away. So what do they need to feel protected? What do they need? What kind of information? How can we help them? She also asked us to focus on veterans who are struggling with PTSD, with the opioid epidemic and the increasing suicide rates that are showing up in our veterans. She said these are really important to our government. And we're getting there because, like I said, at least 3 of the new bulk manufacturing licenses have gone to veteran-based research. And finally, she says that cannabis is a global issue and we must include global knowledge and perspectives. Hey, do you know this lady? This is Jackie Cohen Roth, and she is an MCST class of 21 graduate. She is a social equity entrepreneur, and she is a cannabis educator. She owns 2 organizations, and she is also on the advisory board of CFCR. I had a lot of time to talk to Jackie in so many ways. Jackie does incredible forums. If she comes to your town or you have an opportunity, check them out. She has really great experts that talk. And I asked Jackie, I said, you know, what's most important to you? And she said, you know, what we really need is a prescriptive process that allows us to have our cannabis medicine paid for by our insurance that we pay for all the time. Yes. Yes, for sure. And that has to happen. She said that's so important because whether or not you have a condition in your state that allows you to use medical cannabis, or you're using it in a state that's regulated 21 because it's easier for you to use it that way, but you may be medicating, you're still coming out of your pocket. And if you can come out of your pocket to get that medicine, good for you, you're privileged because not everybody can. Let's not forget that. Jackie also wants us to ask the regulators when they're writing these bills and they're asking us to sit at the table as stakeholders and educators. They want to, she wants to know, like, what's going to happen to the state medical programs when federal cannabis shifts? Are we going to get to keep our programs? What about patient protection rights? So if we come out of Schedule 1 and we move to another schedule, does that mean that I'm now covered by the ADA? By Americans Disabilities Act, does that apply to me? Does that, what about drug testing? On a federal level, if I want a federal job or I want a job that does drug testing, right? So these are really important questions that are important to Jackie. She wants to know whether government will oversee the testing. Mara hopes so. I kind of hope so. And then will patients have access to the same medicine? Some states like California, which has its own issues. Your California people, I'm not going to talk about it in a way that you know more, but when some of those propositions came and brought adult use in, there were many businesses that were supporting medical patients that no longer were viable anymore. And so that becomes a real problem. So what's going to happen there? So my lessons learned were, we have 6 million reported patients in our country, and we have about 24 million cannabis consumers as of recent data. We have an industry that's asking for regulation and federal support. When does that happen? Agencies whose hands are tied with current scheduling, we're getting in our own way. The federal government is now in their own way with researchers who cannot continue the research that they're licensed to do, because the banks won't keep their accounts open. So I think that's a big deal. I think we need to pay attention to that because shared vision is really what we have. And in a time when government feels really divisive, and it is in a lot of ways, in that pageantry it is, but we all really do want the same thing. We want safety, we want access, we want compliance, we want standardization. We want a safe place where we can medicate, and we want the legitimacy on a federal level. And when in a time when we're in a plethora of misinformation and science debunking, it is not healthy for our country to continue to have a federal government that insists on a medicine that 38 states are claiming is legitimate and the federal government won't look at. And I think that continuing to find yourself in opportunities to sit in the office of your representatives and your staffers, I walked into a room yesterday in the Russell Building at Capitol Hill, and I had to walk into an office that I was terrified to walk into because it was a political person who is not in alignment with my thinking and values and principles. Pretty extreme, and I didn't know what I was going to say. But that staffer, we went aside and we talked for 45 minutes, and that staffer said to me, hey, I want to tell you how I feel about it. I'm a medical patient. My parents are medical patients. So anyway, keep talking. Let's keep having the conversations. That's my QR code for my paper. If you want to take a read, it's also on my website, which is www.karenjanes.com. I welcome any questions, and I just want to say congratulations. It is just an honor to be among you.